So I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to read a description, and I want you to tell me if I'm talking about slaves or animals.
Okay.
We break them from one form of life to another. That is to say, we reduce them from their natural state in nature. Whereas nature provides them with the natural capacity to care for their offspring, we break that natural string of independence from them and thereby create a dependency status so that we may be able to get from them useful production for our business and pleasure.
Slave?
Animal.
That's scary.
Okay, question number 2. Test her in every way, because she is the most important factor for good economics. If she shows any sign of resistance in submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her to extract that last bit of resistance out of her.
I'm gonna say animal?
Slave.
I was hoping it would be.
These quotes were pulled directly from a speech given by infamous slave master Willie Lynch, whose name would go on to be forged into history for the creation of lynching, the inhumane, cruel practice of murdering innocent African Americans in the early years of this country. His philosophy was simple: control the slaves as you would an animal. Keep them physically strong but mentally weak. This introduces the long history of treating minorities like African Americans and those of Jewish descent worse by reducing their status to inhumane, subhuman, animal levels. Besides his blatant cruelty, one way in which Willie Lynch was successful was his ability to treat slaves like tools, things to barter, sell, and make money. He saw these people not as people, but as pawns in the economy he was running. He begins this speech by opening with this chilling sentiment. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields for too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires and your animals are killed. He also goes on to say, both horse and the N-word are no good to the economy in the wild or natural state. Both must be broken and tied together for orderly production. This was just a microcosm of the massive empire that was the slave trade that held up the economy of the United States for the majority of our nation's long and controversial history. The slave trade itself depended entirely on bartering, selling, producing, and promoting slaves and African Americans like show pigs, then selling them. But this practice of reducing a group's humanity to nothing is not only common in the United States. It played a heavy role in the Holocaust.
So I'm going to read a passage, and I want you to tell me what you think this is describing.
Okay.
However, it has been observed that when the doors are shut, the load always presses hard against them as soon as darkness sets in. This is because the load naturally rushes toward the light when darkness sets in, which makes closing the doors difficult. Also, because of the alarming nature of darkness, screaming always occurs when the doors are closed. It would therefore be useful to light the lamp before and during the first moments of the operation.
I would say trading slaves on a ship.
So this is a real memo taken verbatim from the published transcript of Shoah, an hour-long documentary on the Holocaust, directed by Claude Lanzmann. So in this memo, the writer, titled Just, attempts to persuade his superior Walter Rauff of the necessity for technical improvements to the vans being used in the early Nazi program of exterminating the Jews and other undesirables just months before the final solution of the gas chambers and death camps was fully operationalized. So it's actually really interesting because he uses, in this memo that he wrote, he refers to the people as the load.
Yeah.
In very non-emotional terms.
Yes.
So
that's so wrong.
Not only was this monotonous, detached language used when describing the Jews, or as they called them, the load, the Nazis went so far as to physically change their outward appearance to make them less individualistic and more like units. This was done by tattooing them with a number so they could easily be tracked and accounted for, giving them the same uniform, and of course, shaving their heads so they were all the same. You go in a prisoner and you walk out a number. This is similar in many ways to factory farming and the way animals are produced on mass scales. They are often given numbers or tags, and other than that, there is little to none to distinguish them from one another. On a smaller level, this is still used every day. Although you may not notice it, because it has become so ingrained in our society. The language we use changes when describing the animal before while living and an animal after in its food state form. Let's take chicken for example. The animal itself, although not as popular as some of the other animals, has been the topic of children's literature. Stories like Chicken Little, The Little Red Hen, and The Chicken Book provide great examples of the way in which chickens are described and depicted while living. All three of these stories have something in common. They all personify the animals that are depicted. For example, in Chicken Little, he is often shown with his family, his father. With Love, Little Red Hen, the cover, in one instance, shows her playing with her chicklets. And in most stories, they either have clothing or are often depicted and shown in clothing. However, this all changes once the animal has been cooked and marketed for our taste buds. A great example is this chicken commercial from Arby's.
Requires no introduction. But chicken at Arby's? That requires some introducing. Chicken. Juicy buttermilk chicken, hand-dipped in buffalo sauce. A new chicken pepperoni palm with fresh mozzarella. So many kinds of chicken!
This language is used even on menus and how we refer to the meat after it's been cooked. No longer is it sentient being with a family or feelings, it's referred to in terms of body parts: thigh, wing, crispy, tender. Although people know what they are eating, there is still a level of comfort when they have to directly face their food. This commercial and the backlash it received is a prime example of this.
Yo, get it twisted. This rap is mine. Mother X gon' give it to you. Wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you. Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real. With the non-stop pop out and stainless steel. Go hard getting down. Like it said freeze. But won't be the one ending up on his knees. Please, if the only thing you can't steal was came out to play, stay out my way. Little. First we gonna rock, then we gonna roll, then we let it pop, don't let it go. X gon' give it to you, he gon' give it to you. X gon' give it to you, he gon' give it to you. First we gonna rock, then we gonna roll, then we let it pop, don't let it go. X gon' give it to you, he gon' give it to you. X gon' give it to you, he gon' give it to you.
This commercial proves that people are comfortable living in ignorance and indulging the cruel and unhumane practices that go into murdering these chickens that we love to consume. However small, people are unaware that every day they are using and taking part in the same practices used by the Nazis and slave masters to remove all personalized characteristics, remove emotions, allows the cruelty and mistreatment to continue, and it even makes it easier.
I'm going to read a description of the living quarters, and I want you to tell me whether it's for an animal or a human.
Okay.
Because of the close quarters and the risk of disease, the use of pharmaceuticals is standard. Antibiotics are administered regularly to ward off the risk of disease caused by the unnatural, unsanitary conditions.
I would say human.
That was for animals and factory farms.
Okay.
Next one. Dampness, leaky roofs, and the fouling of straw and straw mattresses swarm with various sorts of vermin and rats, a constant shortage of water for washing, and a lack of suitable sanitary facilities.
Animal.
That was for Jews during the Holocaust.
That's so sad.
Okay, the final one. Boards fixed upon stakes driven into the ground without mat or covering, collections of straw and old rags thrown down the corners and boxed in with boards. That was the slaves.
Okay.
These were the living spaces provided to slaves, animals in factory farms, and the Jews during the Holocaust. The description the Jewish prisoner was describing was the barracks at the infamous Auschwitz prison camp. In that description, he prefaced his statement with, Wooden floors were an unknown luxury. In a single room, we were huddled like cattle, 10 or a dozen persons, men, women, and children. This process of holding animals and humans inhumanely in cages has been around for decades, but in earlier years, it was seen as socially acceptable and a form of entertainment. Zoos are a controversial topic in modern society because while some see them as harmless, a fun place to take children, others only see them as the monetarized practice of taking animals from their natural habitats to improper holding cages for others' sheer amusement. Whether you like it or not, zoos, for the most part, are an integrated part of our society. However, can you imagine a human zoo? It may sound crazy, but this actually happened. In 1904, at the World's Fair in St. Louis, in the United States, there was a human zoo. This picture depicts the Igorot village that housed ethnic citizens while people watched. They look foreign and almost dystopian to the modern viewer, but this is a part of our history. Another famous picture shows a young African girl being fed from a spectator. This picture is from another human zoo in Belgium. This all ties into another societal flaw, the need for classification. Our society is obsessed with putting people and things into their place. By putting labels on people, it makes it easier to highlight the differences and treat them further like another species, like animals. This was a practice used during the Holocaust. In order to be identified from a distance, to be able to be easily sorted into the categories, Jews were forced to wear different labels on their clothes. Even closer in America's history, during the Civil War era, there was a wave of pseudoscience used to prove that African Americans were of a different species than Anglo-Saxon. This was done by labeling them with different phylum names and images showing the similarities in skull shape to that of a monkey, which served to prove that they were lower on the evolutionary scale, aka less developed than their white counterparts. Although eventually proved wrong, the comparison of African American to the primate served as a dangerous tool for years to come to further highlight the differences between race and humans and further emphasize the similarities between the race and the animal. There is a long-standing tradition in our society of comparing oppressed groups of people to animals, particularly throughout history, Jewish and African American groups of people. In doing so, it has made the mistreatment of said groups easier throughout history by reducing them from humans to lowly, unsentient creatures. The comparison of the African American to the monkey has been used throughout time. It emphasized the bestial nature of the black man, the inferiority, and the lack of intelligence. It was a popular image in pop culture of the era and created a lasting stereotype and stigma of the black man as aggressive and primal. But blacks in America weren't the only oppressed group throughout history to receive an animal counterpart comparison in order to diminish the reputation of said group. Hitler and his propaganda team used the same strategy to compare the Jews with a highly undesirable animal, the rat. These pictures were produced on a mass scale during the Holocaust to create a connection between the Jew and rat, with qualities like sneakiness, uncleanliness, and scheming. As a whole, these comparisons are used to remove the idea of a human being from the mind of the person, or group of people, by systematically mistreating said group without feeling excess guilt about it. By reducing the oppressed group's status from human to subhuman, aka animal level, it all serves to make mistreating said group easier, because they are closer to animals than humans. That has always been the rationale in our history. But this leaves me asking you, the viewer, a question. If we justify treating humans poorly because they are like animals, what does that say about our treatment of animals? You decide.